The house smelled like cold medicine and pine needles, a strange mix that hit me the second I pushed the front door open. The Christmas lights were still on, blinking cheerfully, but inside the living room everything felt wrong, too quiet, too still. My suitcase dropped from my hand when I heard the weak, uneven sound of breathing coming from Grandpa's room. I hadn't planned to come home early. My parents had insisted everything was fine and practically begged me not to worry. "We're taking a well-deserved cruise," they said. * Your grandfather is resting. He'll be * without the fuss. * I believed them, because they were my parents. Because who lies about something like that? I'm the kind of person who shows up, even when it's inconvenient. Especially then. Grandpa raised me for half my childhood while my parents chased careers, promotions, and eventually, comfort. He taught me how to ride a bike, how to save money in a coffee tin, and how to tell when people were smiling but lying. Ironically, I ignored that last lesson when it came to my own family. I followed the sound into his bedroom, my heart pounding harder with every step. Grandpa lay there alone, thinner than I'd ever seen him, eyes half open, lips cracked and dry. The bedside table was empty, no water, no phone, no sign anyone had been there in hours. Maybe longer. "Grandpa?" I whispered. His eyes flickered toward me, and for a moment, relief washed over his face. He tried to speak but couldn't. Panic surged through me as I reached for his hand. It felt cold. I grabbed my phone to call my parents. Straight to voicemail. I checked the family group chat. Photos popped up immediately: sunsets, cocktails, smiling selfies on a cruise ship deck. "Merry Christmas from Paradise," my mom had captioned it just an hour earlier. Paradise. I stood there shaking, staring at my phone, then back at the man who had never once left me alone when I needed him. The realization hit me slowly and then all at once: they knew. They knew he was sick. They knew he couldn't care for himself. And they still left. As I rushed to call an ambulance, a darker thought crept in, one I didn't want to face yet. Grandpa owned the house. His savings. His will. Things my parents talked about more than his health lately. The sirens echoed in the distance as I sat by his bed, holding his hand, watching his chest rise and fall with effort. Outside, the Christmas lights kept blinking, cheerful and ignorant. And deep down, a quiet suspicion settled in my chest: this wasn't just neglect. It was something far worse. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and fear. Machines beeped softly, keeping rhythm with Grandpa's shallow breathing. I sat beside him all night, afraid that if I closed my eyes for even a second, I might lose him. Somewhere out there, my parents were probably clinking glasses under fairy lights, unaware, or pretending to be. When morning came, my phone finally buzzed. "Mom." Her voice sounded annoyed, not worried. "Why are you calling so much?" "We're in the middle of an excursion." I told her everything. About Grandpa being alone. About the ambulance. About the doctor saying he'd been dehydrated, weak, neglected. There was a pause, just long enough to feel wrong. "Well, he never wanted help," she said flatly. "You know how stubborn he is." That was the first red flag. Grandpa had never been stubborn about care. He hated being a burden, yes, but he never refused help when it was offered. And suddenly, I realized something else: no home nurse. No neighbor checking in. Nothing. Just silence. Later that day, while Grandpa slept, I went back to the house to grab some clothes. That's when I noticed the mail stacked neatly on the table, opened. Bank letters. Legal envelopes. I didn't read them, but my stomach twisted anyway. Grandpa never opened mail without his glasses, which were still sitting on the nightstand by his hospital bed. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my dad. "Don't make this dramatic," he warned. You always overreact. Overreact. The word echoed in my head as I stared at Grandpa's unopened medication bottles on the counter. Some were weeks old. One was empty far too soon. That evening, while sitting in the hospital cafeteria, I overheard a voicemail my mom had accidentally sent to the family chat and deleted seconds later, but not fast enough. Her voice was hushed, urgent. If anything happens, we need to be back before the paperwork, the message cut off. Paperwork. When I confronted her, she laughed it off. You're imagining things. You're exhausted. Go home. But how could I go home when every instinct in my body was screaming that something wasn't right? I looked at Grandpa through the glass of his room. Tubes, wires, machines doing the work his body struggled to do. This was the man who skipped meals so I could eat. Who never missed a birthday. Who stayed when others left. And my parents? They hadn't even asked if he was awake. The guilt started to creep in next, what if I had come sooner? What if I had questioned them, the weight of it pressed on my chest until breathing felt hard. That night, Grandpa squeezed my hand weakly and whispered something I barely caught. They took the papers. I leaned closer, heart racing. What papers? But he was already drifting back to sleep. I sat there in the dim light, shaking, finally allowing the doubt to surface. Maybe the cruise wasn't an escape. Maybe it was a cover. The truth didn't come all at once. It leaked out slowly, like poison seeping through cracks, quiet, devastating, impossible to stop once it started. It began with the hospital social worker asking me a simple question. Are you the one listed on your grandfather's power of attorney? I shook my head. No. That should be my parents. She frowned slightly, the kind of professional pause that signals trouble. It was recently changed. My stomach dropped. Changed to who? She hesitated, then turned the clipboard toward me. My parents' names were there, again, but something else caught my eye. A date. 3 weeks ago. Around the same time Grandpa's health had sharply declined. Around the same time my parents suddenly started talking about taking a break and booking that cruise. My hands started to shake. I asked to see the documents. When the hospital administrator brought copies, the pieces finally slammed together. Not just power of attorney, there was a revised will on file too. Grandpa's house. His savings. Everything had been redirected. Cut cleanly away from the small education fund he'd promised me years ago. Folded neatly into my parents' control. And Grandpa's signature? Barely legible. This isn't his handwriting, I said, my voice cracking. He couldn't even hold a pen properly. The administrator gave me a look filled with practiced neutrality and quiet concern. These changes were notarized. Your parents were present. I felt something tear inside my chest. Rage, heartbreak, disbelief, it all collided at once. They hadn't just left him alone. They'd used him. I rushed back to Grandpa's room, documents clutched in my hands. He was awake, eyes glassy but aware. When I told him what I'd found, tears rolled silently down his temples. They said it was temporary, he whispered. Said they needed it to manage things. Promised they'd take care of me. My knees nearly gave out. They told me you were busy, he continued weakly. That you didn't want to be bothered. That was it. The final cut. I stepped into the hallway and screamed, not loud, but from somewhere deep and broken. Every ignored call. Every minimized concern. Every cheerful photo from that cruise suddenly made sense. They hadn't just escaped responsibility. They'd isolated him. Lied to him. Lied to me. And left him to deteriorate while they secured everything he owned. When I called my parents this time, my voice was ice. I know about the will. Silence. Then my dad sighed. You wouldn't understand. We did what was necessary. Necessary. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. My hands were shaking too hard anyway. Back in the room, Grandpa squeezed my fingers with what little strength he had left. Don't let them win, he whispered. I looked down at him, this fragile, betrayed man who had given me everything he could, and something hardened inside me. They thought the cruise gave them distance. They were wrong. It gave me time. And I was done being quiet. For 2 days after the truth came out, I lived on autopilot. I slept in a stiff hospital chair, ate vending machine food, and watched the slow rise and fall of Grandpa's chest like it was the only thing keeping the world in balance. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped, half expecting another lie, half hoping for an apology that never came. Instead, messages from my parents trickled in, carefully worded and cold. We did this for the family. You're being emotional. Don't make things harder than they already are. Harder. I stared at those words while holding Grandpa's hand, feeling how thin his fingers had become. This man had worked until his back gave out. He'd skipped comfort so others wouldn't have to. And now, when he needed them most, they called neglect necessary and greed family duty. The turning point didn't arrive like a lightning strike. It came quietly. A nurse I'd spoken to earlier pulled me aside. He keeps asking if you're okay, she said softly. Not about himself. About you. That broke me. I went back into the room and sat beside him. His eyes opened when he sensed me there. I'm sorry, he whispered. I never meant for this. Something inside me shifted then. The guilt I'd been carrying, I should have known, I should have come sooner, began to loosen its grip. This wasn't my failure. It was theirs. I leaned close so he could hear me clearly. You don't have to worry anymore, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm here. And I'm not letting them do this to you. For the first time since I arrived, his face relaxed. That night, while Grandpa slept, I opened my laptop. I reread the documents, line by line. I wrote down dates. Names. Notary stamps. I remembered every offhand comment my parents had made about money, about simplifying things, about how Grandpa's house was too much responsibility for him now. Patterns emerged where chaos used to be. They hadn't panicked when Grandpa got sick. They'd planned. And planning meant mistakes. Paper trails. Witnesses. I wasn't powerless. I'd just been kept in the dark. The fear I'd been living with began to transform, slowly, into something sharper. Focus. Purpose. I didn't need to scream or confront them yet. I needed to be smart. Grandpa had always taught me that real strength wasn't loud. It was patient. By morning, I had a list of calls to make, a lawyer, a hospital's legal advocate, and the notary whose name appeared on every suspicious document. My parents still thought I was the emotional kid who could be dismissed with a few condescending words. They didn't see what was coming. I looked at Grandpa, sunlight just touching his face through the window. They underestimated me, I whispered, more to myself than to him. Just like they underestimated you. And for the first time since Christmas, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Not hope. Resolve. I didn't confront my parents. Not yet. That was the hardest part, pretending nothing had changed while everything inside me burned. They still believed distance gave them control. I let them keep that illusion. Step 1 was proof. The lawyer I met didn't promise miracles, but her eyes sharpened the moment she saw the dates on the documents. Timing matters, she said. And so does capacity. Grandpa's medical records showed cognitive decline starting before the will was changed. That alone raised questions. Not answers, but cracks. Step 2 was witnesses. I spoke to the hospital staff who'd seen my parents' visit before the cruise. A nurse remembered my mom insisting Grandpa was confused and didn't need to make calls. Another recalled my dad rushing the notary visit, asking Grandpa to just sign so we can handle things. None of it sounded illegal on its own. Together, it sounded calculated. Step 3 was the notary. I called under the guise of confusion, pretending I wanted to understand Grandpa's wishes. The man was polite, too polite. He repeated the same phrase 3 times, "Your grandfather appeared lucid." But when I asked whether a doctor had evaluated Grandpa that day, there was a pause. A long one. "No," he admitted. "Your parents said it wasn't necessary." I wrote that down. Still, my parents acted untouchable. From the cruise, they sent cheerful updates and vague reassurances. "We'll handle everything when we're back. Don't stress your grandfather." The nerve of it made my jaw ache. That's when I realized something crucial. They weren't afraid. Which meant they thought they'd already won. So I set the trap quietly. I messaged my mom, pretending to soften. "I'm overwhelmed. Maybe you're right. I just want to understand what Grandpa wanted." Within minutes, she called sweet, soothing, careful. Too careful. I let her talk. I let her explain. I let her contradict herself. Every call was recorded. Every message saved. Then I mentioned one small thing. The hospital asked about the will. They seemed concerned. Her voice changed. Just slightly. "Concerned how?" "Got you." I didn't accuse. I didn't threaten. I let silence do the work. People reveal more when they think they're fixing a problem. She started explaining timelines that didn't match the paperwork. She mentioned meetings that hadn't happened. Lies stacked on lies, each one documented. Meanwhile, Grandpa slowly stabilized. Weak, yes, but present. And that terrified them more than anything else. 2 days later, my dad texted, "We're cutting the trip short." I stared at the message, heart pounding. They were coming back. They still thought this was damage control. They had no idea they were walking straight into daylight, armed with nothing but their own lies. And I was ready. Because the next move wasn't about revenge. It was about exposure. And once the truth surfaced, there would be no cruise ship far enough to run. They arrived at the hospital like nothing was wrong, tan, rested, and annoyed, as if we had interrupted their vacation. My mom hugged me stiffly. My dad barely looked at Grandpa before asking to talk privately. I let them think they were in control. The meeting room overlooked the parking lot, all glass and harsh daylight. A hospital administrator joined us, followed by someone my parents clearly didn't expect, the lawyer. The air shifted instantly. "What's this?" my dad snapped. "Clarification," the lawyer said calmly, placing a folder on the table. "About the recent changes to your father's legal documents." My mom's smile faltered. I watched their faces as the pages slid across the table, medical timelines, recorded statements, notarization records. Then the audio file played. My mom's voice filled the room, unmistakable. "If anything happens, we need to be back before the paperwork." Her face drained of color. The administrator leaned forward. "We also have staff statements indicating your father was discouraged from contacting family and denied adequate care prior to your trip." "You're twisting this," my dad said, standing. "This is a family matter." "No," I said quietly. "This is neglect. And fraud." That's when the door opened again. Grandpa was wheeled in, fragile but alert. The sight of him stopped them cold. He looked at my parents, not with anger, but with something far worse. Disappointment. I trusted you, he said, his voice thin but steady. You told me she didn't care. That she was too busy to come. My mom burst into tears. My dad tried to speak, but nothing came out. The lawyer didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Given the evidence, we're filing for immediate suspension of your power of attorney. The revised will is being contested due to incapacity and undue influence. The administrator added, Adult Protective Services has been notified. It felt cinematic, slow, unreal, watching their confidence collapse. The people who'd smiled on a cruise deck were now scrambling, exposed under fluorescent lights. Later that afternoon, the truth spread through the family faster than I expected. Calls. Messages. Silence. Support. My parents' story unraveled the moment it met daylight. The house they'd rushed to claim? Frozen. Accounts? Under review. They left the hospital without saying goodbye. I stood by Grandpa's bed that evening, the storm finally passing. You did this, he whispered. No, I said, squeezing his hand. You survived it. I just made sure the truth showed up. Outside, the Christmas lights were still blinking, but now they felt different. Not mocking. Just honest. And for the first time since I walked through that door, justice didn't feel far away. It felt inevitable. The weeks that followed felt quieter than I expected. Not peaceful, quiet in the way a storm leaves silence behind, as if the world itself is catching its breath. My parents didn't disappear overnight, but the power they once carried did. The accounts were frozen pending investigation. The house was legally secured in Grandpa's name again. The revised will was thrown out, replaced by the one he'd written years earlier, clear, steady, unmistakably his. Adult Services stayed involved, not to punish, but to protect. And my parents? They stopped calling. Family gatherings became smaller. Conversations shifted. The story they'd planned to control was no longer theirs to tell. People saw them differently now, not as victims of a dramatic child, but as adults who chose a cruise over care, money over decency. That kind of reputation doesn't heal easily. Grandpa recovered slowly. There were hard days, painful ones, but he wasn't alone anymore. I moved back into the house, not out of obligation, but choice. We rebuilt routines together. Morning tea. Old movies. Quiet talks that felt heavier now because we both understood how close we'd come to losing everything. One evening, he handed me a small envelope. Inside was a note in his familiar handwriting, stronger than it had been weeks before. You didn't just save my life. You saved my dignity. I cried then. Not from anger. Not from grief. From release. I learned something through all of this. The trail doesn't always come with shouting or cruelty. Sometimes it comes wrapped in smiles, in we know what's best, in postcards from paradise. And justice doesn't always look like revenge, it looks like truth standing up, steady and unafraid. My parents lost what they tried to steal, not just money or property, but trust. Once that's gone, no document can bring it back. As for me, I didn't walk away richer in the way they measured wealth. I walked away stronger. Clearer. Untouchable in a way I'd never been before. Because when you choose to protect the vulnerable instead of exploiting them, the world has a way of making room for you. And here's the truth I want to leave you with. If someone betrays you while you're looking away, especially when love and family are involved, don't doubt your instincts. Doubt their story. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, if you've ever been made to feel too emotional for telling the truth, share your story in the comments. You're not alone. And if you want more real stories where lies collapse and truth wins, subscribe. Sometimes, the most poetic justice isn't watching villains fall. It's watching them realize they never owned what they tried to steal.